This conference will now be recorded.
Sorry, Rory, I forgot.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm glad you remembered to record it. So these next photos, this just show Honey Spot Road, and this image to the left, this is near I-95 overpass, kind of showing some improvements there, and then again, just the concept plan of kind of the view of how it could look in that rendering, showing a bike lane and pedestrians there. In this last one, this is Lordship Boulevard, where the concept actually included a 10-foot wide multi-use shared side path. You'll see some median islands were added there, and some refugee islands, crosswalks. And again, I don't expect you guys to be able to read everything and see everything, but it's a great plan to take a look at. And we were just thinking maybe this is something to kind of include in this POCD if there's some desire and thoughts for that. So again, we'll share the copy of this as well. So then with that, really the point of today's meeting is to talk to you all and have a discussion. So the first question here as we get into it, and please anybody just chime in with this, but what are the strengths related to mobility? What is the town doing well? And please anybody just feel free to chime in.
Rory, I just want to state for the record, we have 2 additional members. Chris Timniak just joined a few minutes ago. He's also a member of the Traffic Authority, and Chris Green is a member of our Greenway and Complete Streets Committee.
Okay.
For those who joined late, Rory was just going through what is in the current POCD and another plan that was done for Stratford Ave, Honey Spot Road, and Lordship Boulevard in 2017 or 2015. By the same team, and we just wanted to see if those concepts are still relevant today, and if we should include those concepts in the current POCD update or not. And then Rory is just asking these questions to have a facilitated discussion right now. And I think we just see another member, Stephen Michelle. Which group is Stephen from?
I'm with Greater Bridgeport Transit.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Steve. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would, just open it up for discussion. Please, anybody feel free to get the ball rolling. What's the town doing well? What are the strengths related to mobility?
May I make a comment?
Go for it, Harold. Yeah.
I printed out our resolution adopting the Town of Stratford Complete Streets policy that I think if you could go back and reference that, because it covers a lot of the questions that you're talking about, at least in our stated goals of what we're looking for. But also we have a complete streets policy that was adopted almost 3 years ago now, which really lays out what we think is important and where we think we should be going. So I would think that if you could look at a copy of that, it's not just a bicycle greenway policy. It really covers our ADA accessibility, our senior, our safe school travel. All of that is embedded in this policy that was built around the national AAA Complete Streets policy. So I think a lot of work had been done a year and a half ago on coming up with this that actually might help you in terms of thinking about where we are in terms of what our thinking is. There's also a compilation of some of the major maps that we really felt like are policies that should be held on to in terms of planning policies, that we shouldn't dismiss those, that they should be incorporated in a future POCD. The site plan that you, the planning document that you brought up concerning Stratford Avenue with the circle and all of that, my assumption is that that's moving forward and that's a state project, correct?
Yes, that's moving forward. We got the grant money for that. Mm-hmm.
Where we need to, I think, one of the strengths or one of the weaknesses that we have is our progress on local connectivity. We need to increase I'm going to say our CIP or our budget line locally in the town so that we can start planning signage and all of and striping on the roads that are never going to be absolutely complete streets, but that can be incorporated into the network of formal complete streets that we need in order to have the connectivity. Like River Road, I think will be another 20 years before anybody ever really puts in a real bike path there, but it's being used right now by people that are traveling from the north to the south on a fairly regular basis. It surprises me how many people are riding that with no striping. So we need to look at what can we do that's cost effective, that we can do it with the simplest striping and signage locally. I know that's not necessarily addressing Greater Bridgeport and all of that, but I think that they need to spend more time becoming aware of what our build out looks like on our local roads also.
Great, thank you, Harold.
I think Ariel wants to talk. I see it was highlighted twice. Anybody else has anything to add?
Sumitha, yes, it's Larry. So one thing, and again, it's a little bit off the question for discussion list here, but I thought it was very relevant. I've been sitting on a committee, and I think Chief Joe McNeil might have been involved as well, where the state's contemplating over the next 3 to 5 years to provide high-speed rail service, which would increase the speed of the trains up to 90 miles an hour. But that would create a problem with the rail bridges, in that the depth of the rail bridges would be changed. So the design would be changed. The height clearance would change, which would then predicate perhaps digging into the ground and modification of the bridging system. My question is, have you looked at your plan, or have you coordinated with the DOT, and I believe MetroCog's involved, to take in consideration that planning as well?
We have not at
That's
this
a good
point.
question, Larry. We haven't even looked at it yet, to be very honest, but you raised a very good point, which has to be included in the POCD, that in order to prepare for the next generation of transportation systems, the town needs to be prepared to fix up the bridges to meet the conditions. And that would, that line alone would help us to apply for a grant if that becomes available at some point in the future, to actually avail that and fix the bridges and the railroads. So that's a very good point. And Rory, I think we should look into the rail service planning. And that also brings up the connection with the bus. How does the bus, the rail systems, how do they interact and sync together?
Thanks. Looks like Tom wants to chime in here. Tom.
Yeah, I think that's great news, Larry. I had not heard about that, and I think most people know I run a couple of the farmers markets in town, and I've been consistently approached by people with ADA accessibility issues, and those train bridges are very dangerous for people on wheelchairs to cross through. So anything that we can do to get them both widened and heightened, I didn't even think that was even remotely possible. But if those train lines are going to demand it, we really should marry those needs. There's so many people within reach of Stop and Shop that still won't walk there because passing under the train line is so harrowing. So that would be a real benefit. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Tom. The other part of this that we all need to contemplate, it's not just about the build out, it's about the interruption of service to certain roadways during the construction phase. And part of my role has been to make sure that our public safety vehicles, which are taller than normal SUVs and cars, have clear ways of getting from the south to the north and vice versa, and particularly during the construction phases of these bridges.
Great. Thanks, Larry. Chris, it looks like you go for it.
Um, yeah, one of the things also I think is it's great to see all these different efforts. I'm glad to see, Complete Streets and Greenway merging together because I think that allows more integration of those ideas which were kind of in parallel. And just overall the integration though, like when we had the, exit 33 interchange redone, that was a really great opportunity to look at bike lanes through another one of our congested areas. And, that was a great project, but it's entirely car centered. There's a few new sidewalks there that are nice, but when it came to incorporating bike lanes or stuff, there's not really that integration that as we're getting these grants and these projects, if it's specifically a roadway project, getting some of the input on, again, these greenway sort of things, accessibility for bikes and things like that. And I just want to plus one on Tom. I've also heard from people, when I was knocking on doors about the ADA accessibility, that sort of that whole shopping plaza is cut off to people north of that train bridge because it's such a dangerous place to go under. And that again speaks to integration as well. Like I know we're doing, the Barnum Avenue, that bridge area there. I hope there's some consideration for our, bike and walking as they're redoing that area. Yeah.
May I make a comment on that?
Go for it, Harold. Yeah.
Chris brings up a really big point. I tried to chase down when they were designing those two exits, inter-exit, those on 95, that they include there's a percentage of their budget that has to go towards multimodal transportation. I got a commitment out of them to put in 3-foot bike lanes, which is not huge, but at least it's something. But none of them got built. I had several correspondence with leaders at the state DOT. They are mandated by law to reflect the community's needs. I think what we need in Stratford is Greater Bridgeport and MetroCog to help us press the case that when any of this reconstruction is done, that we need to have it be multimodal. And I think the DOT is only going to do that if they feel some pressure locally from us.
Yeah, so we can move on. Just kind of talk about progress. What in the past 10 years towards different goals from your board and commission. What progress has been made. And I know we talked about the complete streets policy, greenways. Anyone? Doug, it looks like you.
Yeah, I have a couple things I'd like to share, and I won't take up too much time, but going back to the slide that you had when you were telling about what you learned in your outreach, I can address a couple of those things. The idea of a more robust GBT service, I would agree with that. And we do have a couple irons in the fire. We have the notion of stronger connection with Milford and Bridgeport and Point South and North. You're served by the Coastal Link, which is now half hour. It provides about 100,000 boardings a month. It's probably one of the busiest bus routes in the state. And I've asked for funding to make that 20-minute service. That might not sound like a lot, but that's more reliable service, and you start to get away from the need to even have a schedule. You go to the stop, the bus arrives, and it'll help with some of the crowding issues because we're back at pre-pandemic levels. Some months a little bit above that. We also asked to improve the frequency on our Route 15, which goes from the Holly Lane up into Derby from hour to half hour. And then the 23, which runs right through town, up River Road, and then Constitution Boulevard. That's a peak period service. We've asked for funding to close the midday gap and just have that service all day long. So there are some enhancements. Probably still some difficulty getting from the south end of town to north without having to go to Bridgeport that we could address. But that's where we are on the fixed route side. On the paratransit side, what you heard about senior transportation has been a huge problem for us. We have been unable to get qualified drivers. It's been a nightmare. However, prior to this kind of post-pandemic period, we were planning a much improved service for seniors and riders with disabilities. We did, with a company called WSP, we did a gap analysis. And we found really that a lot of the mobility gaps in the region aren't solved by the fixed route buses, but by kind of, for lack, I try to avoid planning speak, but a customer centric approach. And seniors and people with disabilities are among the people that have gaps. Seniors don't have same day service from us. They don't go outside of the geographic service area that is the minimum required for ADA. And there are other constituencies that we found: reentry folks who were once incarcerated, and people, refugees who are coming into the region who have late night jobs. They can get there by bus, but they can't get back. So in August, I asked our board for approval to create a position and open a new office at GVT, and that is the Office for Mobility on Demand. So we expect to be able to close the gaps for seniors and have a much heartier service. We have to work our way through some of the remedial problems that we have right now. We start a new training, a new group of 7 drivers on next Tuesday, which will really help, and then we'll just keep going from there. So we've established a committee with the senior centers and some of our major trip generators. They had their first meeting in October. The next one is, I think, next week, and I share updates with them. So I expect to have more sophisticated software and ways to organize trips and plan trips. And I have a really good candidate to be the director of the Office for Mobility on Demand, and we will be interviewing her today at 3 o'clock. So we're moving as quickly as we can there. So there's a lot going. And then the last thing is, and I don't know if there's interest in this for the Plan of Conservation and Development, but we have been operating the first 2 battery electric buses in Connecticut here in the region. And before the Hampden fire, we had operated them for 18 months and put 53,000 miles on without incident. They work very well for us. It's a different product from the one that caught on fire in Hampden, but kind of out of a kind of coordinated effort, we stopped operating them. But right now we're working on plans to put them back into service, and we have 3 more that are just being built in Los Angeles by Proterra, and these they'll be arriving starting next week, and then 2 of them in December. So we are trying to get the cleaner propulsion systems and grapple with the much bigger questions about how we convert the rest of the fleet, exactly how we go about that. So
Thanks, Doug. That's great. Good to hear. So we talked, we did start off talking about the issues. Before we move to the next question, was there any other issues that you needed to be addressed that you guys can, and we can always come back to this one as well. You were brought up already. All right, well, we'll move on. What needs does your board commission have that the town could or should respond to? Any thoughts, anything? Needs?
This is I think something that needs to be discussed, we need to bring up. Public Works does not have the greenway maintenance in a regular budget line item. We need to really consider that, because every time we have any need, just as simple as sweeping, they can only fit it in as they're able to. And it puts pressure on them that I think is unfair. If we're going to continue to develop these, we need to also give them a line item that specifically covers our multimodal transportation, so that they have a better ability to do that. We're doing a lot of things moving in the right directions. We're doing an inventory of sidewalk conditions. We're doing all kinds of things that will help. But eventually it's all going to come back to Public Works doing the work itself, that we need to find a way in the POCD to address that we build the support for that.
Great, thanks, Harold. That's a good point. Anyone else? Any needs? All right, we'll move on to this next one. Is there any desire to adjust parking standards or maybe establish some bike parking standards in town, maybe electric vehicle parking standards? And then, Susmita brought up the fact that, Stratford hasn't done a parking study, so maybe is there a need to, do a parking utilization study here in town?
I just want to let you know that we have $25,000 in our budget to do a downtown parking study. And I don't know, for me, the reason I said that to Rory is because it'll help us understand if there are any lots that are underutilized, if there are any lots that can share parking, if there's any need, unmet need, especially near the train station, and to figure out ideas on how these could be worked out. And sometimes underutilized lots can present development opportunities too. So that's going to be a taxable development there instead of having an empty parking lot, just to think about.
Tom?
Yeah, I think, this is definitely an area where a lot of people are dissatisfied with the amount and location of parking throughout town. And I think some of our problems are structural, but others, seem like there's some avenues. And so I've always gotten a little bit of mixed messaging on the train station parking outside of commuting hours. The businesses that are right there by the train station are constantly, pleading for more parking and easier. And my understanding, and this is a good meeting to see if we can do something here, is my understanding is that it's legal to park in those spots after hours. So for restaurants at night, the train station parking is legal, but there's so much confusion about whether they're going to get ticketed or not. So I guess I'm asking, can we get that clarified? And on the assumption that we can utilize a very large empty parking lot after hours and on weekends, can we do a better job with signage and publicity to make sure people know that they can park there? It feels like a walk because the highway divides the parking lot from the stores, but it's not far. I mean, it's not as far as you'd walk in a mall parking lot. So that's one. And the other one that I feel like is a very low-hanging fruit is if you think about Linden Avenue that runs parallel to the highway. It's a wide street. It's an unusually wide street. The parking on it right now is parallel to the street. And when we were working on the Complete Streets designs, they showed us a example of a new parking standard where people come in at an angle, and it inherently increases the number of spots available on that street. So I figured even a dozen or two spots would help. The other thing, and I'll stop here, is the recommendations for the greenway underneath the train trestle and the highway in that area. Definitely, I believe it takes 2 or 3 spots that people are used to there, and they're going to howl. I mean, there's going to be a reaction to that. So I feel like if we can get ahead of that and make sure we're adding spaces or at least clarifying the spaces that are available now, that would be a big help.
May I make a comment on that also, that because in front of zoning, we have the Masonic Temple building coming up, which is in and of itself creating tension for the Methodist Church next door. Both of them are utilizing primarily the same property almost to park. And I suggested to all the parties involved that they go and see about using the railroad parking lot at nighttime, when theoretically it's not being utilized for train parking. Douglas, you raised your hand. Do you have a comment on that in any way?
Yeah, I wasn't being rude on that phone. I called a friend of mine who manages the Milford train station parking lot, and he told me that the state mandated that he allow the public to park after 4 o'clock, and not charge anything. So after 4 on weekends is free at Milford. And that might not be the rule everywhere, but that's certainly what's in place at the Milford train station. So I just thought I'd reach out to him and ask him that.
So I know from all of my land board positions that parking, particularly in the Todd, is always a problem. And some of it's perceptual, some of it's real. But we need to do what we can in the next POCD to utilize. I'm going to mention there is a Great Barrington in Massachusetts had a similar problem with both their train station and their local retail parking. And they have done, I think, a very good job of essentially leasing land from store owners, commercial strips, and managing it in so that they can get full utilization of all available parking. It might be a giant leap for Stratford to think about, but we do have a lot of churches that only use their parking on Sundays. You know, there are ways that we need to start thinking differently about our available parking.
Great. So it sounds like maybe a parking study, suggesting a parking study in the POCD makes a lot of sense here. And we did hear at some of the workshops, maybe for, down in Lordship, there's a school, maybe during the summer, let people park at the school and offer some shuttles down to the beach and things like that. So there is a lot of opportunity for kind of shared parking at different times.
And Rory, we actually formalized that in one of our on zoning. We made that a condition. So we are moving forward with that already.
Oh, great. That's awesome. Good to hear. So Doug talked about the changes to GBT service. We mentioned, he mentioned the coastal link. Is there any other things we should add to that question? Anything, Doug? Is more robust service needed to connect Stratford to Milford and Bridgeport? It sounds like that's already happening to some extent.
May I make a comment again on
Sure.
what Doug is doing? I use his buses to take my bike to Milford. I'm happy to hear that you're going to go even more with it. I also want everybody to realize that that is all part of the East Coast Greenway, and that it is to the point where we are asking people to ride their bikes or walk through Stratford from Bridgeport, Stratford into Milford on an East Coast Greenway that we don't pay any mind to, that we need. That's a national route that we need to start paying a little more attention to. The folly that it's going to be built up on the Merritt Parkway is decades away. But also, I will use as an example, I think it's Fairfield or Westport has decided they don't want the East Coast Greenway to be north. They want it to run through their central districts. They're moving as close to the water as they can. And Stratford actually has that now, but we need to formalize it. We have old signs that have been up there for a decade with nothing when people ride through our town. That to me is something that needs to have some attention paid to it.
Chris?
To speak again with linking us to other towns for bikes and greenways like Harold's talking about, what is the integration with enhanced bikeability, walkability with the work on the Washington Bridge? Is there any right now? Because I know there's work going on that bridge, and that's the Harold. That's the greenway that you're talking about route, right?
Absolutely, yes.
I think John Casey would be able to answer that question, and unfortunately, he's not in the office today and tomorrow, so we can get back on that.
I spoke with them when they were early planning on that about moving the sidewalks all to one side and making them 5 feet wide. That was they didn't want to discuss it, but theoretically that would have been an opportunity to make that happen. Like it or not, it's part of the East Coast Greenway. So whether we say locally we don't want bikes across there, they're going across anyhow.
Thanks. All right, so this
Rory,
next one.
before we finish this part, I know Tom Dillon had something to add, but I'll just finish up, Tom, and then I'll let you speak. I want to know from, especially from Doug, because he's not with Town of Stratford, he's an outside entity. I want to know what is it that Stratford's POCD should include in terms of transit that would help us gain more grant funding to implement the multimodal transportation goal? With that said, I will have Tom ask his question first or answer this question, and then Doug can respond to it.
Sure. So the other one, which I know is a long shot and a little lofty, but I mean, ever since I moved into this town, it was obvious, and people have been talking about it all these years. Is there a public transport path to a internal Stratford bus system, a trolley of sorts to connect the different sections of town? I think, Doug, you're familiar enough with Stratford that we have all these distributed retail centers, we have little pockets of commercial activity, and then we have tons and tons and tons of dense housing, on the main roads connecting them. So for decades, as long as I've been here, the goal is always been, or a desire has always been, to have an internal trolley-based system. And I don't know, does the GBT have any other examples of that out in the state? Is there any sort of path in terms of grants or monies to, really fuel a little Mr. Rogers trolley inside town? Is that possible at all?
We had a trolley once that we ran in Bridgeport. We didn't get a lot of ridership, and so we did it in Fairfield for a while, and everybody liked when it rang the bell, but nobody really got on board. But here's the thing, and I think what you're talking about is particularly relevant in Stratford, because that it's always been, I've been here 20 years now, it's the connection from north to south has always been problematic. Now, we don't go to Lordship now, but if something happens at the engine plant, we'd probably be back down that part of the town again. And what I have discovered, or at least come to the conviction that, the fixed route service may not be the solution. That's traditionally where we would go. Someone would say, we've got an industrial park up in Monroe on Pepper Street, and there's 7 people who could work there. Can you run a bus up there? So I run the bus 2 times in the morning, 2 in the afternoon. Everybody rides the bus. Their chief concern is saving enough money to get a car, not be on the bus. So I think, and that's why we've opened this office of mobility as a service, because we don't necessarily now need to use the city bus to do that. We don't even need to use our minibuses to do that. We could contract for that, directly with someone to provide. It doesn't have to be. That's why we want to get into the mobility, kind of management business. What's the lowest cost, most appropriate way to provide the access? And I know that that Smriti has said in the past that there's a, in our gap analysis, that there's a need to move people about the town for recreational purposes. It isn't all just commuting. It isn't all just doctor's appointments and shopping, but to get to the recreational purpose. So I'd be happy to look into that and put that in our planning hopper. I think that's an interesting way a direction to point the mobility on demand, because that might be how the model works. That it doesn't run a circuit, but you call for it, and it tells you when it, you can see on the app when it will be there. Now, other places are doing this. They call it microtransit in some parts of the world, and there's definitely a growing number of places that are trying that. Some places more successfully than others. It tends to be better when it my understanding is when it doesn't replace a fixed route bus, but when it covers something that the fixed route bus never did before. So all of the destination, we could look at the main recreational destinations and start planning that way. But and I think the folks at FHI know a lot about this and about microtransit, and could incorporate a recommendation for something like that into the POCD.
Thank you, Doug.
If we can follow up.
A lot of people mentioned in our pop-up events, especially the people that I spoke to that were younger, that if they had that connection to take that and go to the train station, that would be a benefit for them, like having a shuttle that they can take from their, intersection somewhere nearby and then go to the train station.
Yeah, Norwalk has a really good example of this, and where they've done microtransit. Estuary, the Ninetown up in Clinton, Essex, in that area, they've done it as well. Those are the 2 pilots in Connecticut that I know of. And by the way, I do have a $300,000 request in to run a pilot like that in our region. Whether it gets funded or not, I don't know. But in one of the last bills that the state passed in the last session, they directed the DOT to I think it's a discretionary program, so competitive, to provide, to do some pilot microtransit work. So
yeah, to follow up on that is even a more specific point opportunity, Doug, is currently the Shakespeare Market in conjunction, which is an independent organization, and the health department and Nourish Bridgeport are all going after a grant to build sustainable food systems. And so one of our goals is to make SNAP benefits available at Stratford farmers markets, but not only that, to try and address the transportation issue. So these are like once a week, 4-hour blocks where we want to make sure that the people that can benefit from that actually can get there. So we're trying to apply for some grant money to fund a spot transportation shuttle or on-demand transportation system specifically to bring people to the farmers markets, where they can benefit from that. So that would be another very active opportunity in Stratford to apply that kind of spot funding should it come through.
Yeah, I think that's a good addition. Tammy Trojanowski reached out to me about a month ago with that
Yep.
same idea.
Yeah, we're working on all that together. Yep.
Can I add to what Tom just said? Stratford just launched this year a senior walking program, a MAP program in 10 districts across the town. They all begin at one of the schools. So that's something that I think we could easily be expanded, but Doug, could also be tied into what you're looking for. That was funded through AARP, and I know that a lot of your projects interest AARP in terms of their funding for those kind of green communities.
Yeah, I think these are great ideas, and should be incorporated into the plan. I have to say that I haven't been more excited about a new position in a long time. We were getting a little stodgy with the services we were providing, same thing, and after the gap analysis, it just dawned on me that what do they say, like, to a hammer everything looks like a nail. I mean, now we're looking at things differently. Took a step back. So we're not going to just extend the buses and everything. The fixed route isn't a solution to all of this. So I'm happy to be at this meeting. I think all of those ideas are good. I do have 2 things that from the question before about what could be incorporated into the POCD. If you're talking about securing funding, you're going to need to talk about equity and how it's spent. That's how the bipartisan infrastructure law is going. That's one of the criteria for getting the money, and another one is safety. You have to really emphasize safety. I don't know if that's more in a long-range transportation plan or POCD, but those are the things that they're talking about when they're starting to see the notices of funding availability come out from FTA. I suspect it's true on the highway side.
Thank you, Doug. That's great feedback.
So this next question, what plans does your board or commission have, over the next several years that could impact the town? We talked about quite a few of these already. So, and then if anybody wants to answer, what is your vision, for the services that you provide, in what ways could or should it change, looking ahead for the next 10 years? Chris?
I really like the way this committee has been shaped over the last couple of years, thanks to Harold, of bringing a lot of people on who actually do like to bike and walk around the town. And I love that in addition to trying to plan, these sorts of initiatives, we're also trying to host events at town things to get people out there biking and being active in general, and in coordination with, you know, some of the senior walking events and things like that. I like the idea of this being a committee that both thinks about infrastructure and planning, but also very boots on the ground and boots out the door, getting people active in the community. So I hope we continue to see this committee as something that the mission is both of those things.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else? Any thoughts about visions or other plans we should know about? Any other issues that we didn't talk about?
Rory, I'm sorry. I have tons to say. I'm trying not to, but I think that looking at it from a Complete Streets Greenway committee person, I think that it's an education job. We need to continue working with Public Works. We need to keep working with the police department. We need to keep building those networks of a mutual understanding. We've made huge. Larry helped us get a parking lot at our Main Street Festival this year for bikes. That took 3 years to do, but the people that used it were so excited to ride to an event in Stratford on their bike, and it changed their whole concept of walking and riding through Stratford is a different experience than being in a car. And that's one of the things that I keep trying to tell everybody, that we have an opportunity. People from all over the state can come and experience the shore in our local community. That is a huge economic thrust that we need to actually embrace. And people are beginning to. I'm always hopeful. I think that will continue as we have results that are coming up with the grants that we're experiencing right now for Complete Streets. Doug, I just want to make one final comment to you. We fought hard for bus shelters on our Complete Streets between Paradise and downtown. I hope that will help encourage people to start using them more. I know that'll take a couple of years.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I have to say, in my time here, the world has changed, because there were places that people did not want the bus, and places where they didn't even want a sign or anything like that. And we used to have to beg and, and get rejected most of the time. Now we're just showered with requests for amenities for the system.
Well, it's one of the things that we've done on planning and zoning, is requiring all new construction, all new development to have bicycle facilities. That has become a standard, and it's actually being written into the new zoning regulations, that when people come in with projects, they have to include that. And most developers are happy to do it. I just this past week got a developer who put in a bicycle room in a new apartment building. That to me is a very sophisticated thing for Stratford to have.
That's a home run. Yeah. Nice.
Harold, if
Yes,
I
ma'am.
may add, the ARB has been encouraging that too, although it's not embedded in the zoning regulations yet. One more thing to add is the EV charging stations. They are by special permit, I think, right now, because they're unnamed uses. So the revised zoning regs should include them as of right users, and see how each development style would need what kind of EV charging stations too. Mm-hmm.
And Susmitha, we are actually discussing that. How can we come up with a general regulation that also protects the visual landscape of Stratford? So I believe that there will be a text amendment coming from zoning.
Okay.
Now, the EV charging infrastructure might be something you want to address simultaneously with the parking work that you're planning. I mean, that's kind of what that's about, right? I mean, it would make sense to be doing a parking study with an eye towards where there might be the charging infrastructure. Just a thought.
Thanks, Doug.
That's a good point.
Anyone else? Any thoughts about vision, or thinking ahead to the next 10 years? Anything that we should know? Anything else that should be included? And I will say, I know this 1 hour was short. What we will plan to do is share this list of questions. And if a week from now you think of something you want to add, please feel free to email Susmitha or myself. If there's anything that we didn't touch on today that you want to chime in. And Harold, go for it.
I'll keep going until you say go away. But one of the things that I'm always fearful is getting lost in our complete streets Greenway plans is that there's a concept of safe schools, safe travel to schools that I want to see remain in whatever we do for the next POCD as a priority. Because if we're not offering that to kids going to their local school and traveling home to their local neighborhood, then we're not creating the next generation of bike riders. And I think that's really critical that we offer that. It exists on some level very small, but we really need to start making that so that parents feel comfortable letting their kids ride bikes to school, meaning like we need safe places for them to park them at school. We need an investment in all of that. And I don't think that our current education system is capable of developing all that as a funding mechanism. The town needs to help them do that.
Harold, in the past, there was a program called Safe Routes to School.
Yes.
And through that, several communities were funded for traffic calming improvements. But that funding dried up. I'm thinking it might be opening again with the infrastructure bill. I don't know. But I want to quickly say something before we finish up this call. There were two things that haven't been discussed in this call that maybe you can go back, think about those, and come back with ideas. Traffic calming, which locations in town would need traffic calming, and maps of concepts like for greenways and complete streets, what additional routes to include, or even bus routes, additional possible routes. The reason I'm saying this is because when you include this in the POCD, it'll automatically, when it is adopted by the town council, it'll automatically be included in any grant writing. So any funding that is out there, we can use this document to apply for those grants and avail those grants.
Thank you, Susmitha. That's really critical, I think. If I can add something to the end of that, we need a document in our POCD, Rory, that we can actually use. Right now, this piece is huge. You can't reproduce it. You can't break it apart into sections. When I was on planning, we broke it into chapters and highlighted everything that planning needed to do. But we reduced the whole thing down to 8.5 by 11, so that we actually every month picked a subject and said, are we moving forward on this? But I will honestly tell you, I bet you 90% of the people in Stratford, even the people that are in elected land positions, don't look at this document. Developers don't spend enough time looking at this document to know what are we looking at. I have citizens all the time saying, why is this parking going here? Why is this going here? And it's like, because it's in our POCD. And our land board is required to follow the POCD. So we need to make it in such a way that everybody has access to it. That's my comment on that. That's really critical.
I can add to that. I agree with that. I understand that principle too. I mean, we get asked, like municipalities do, to do an awful lot of studies. An awful lot of plans and projects for compliance purposes. And sometimes I read them, not just here, but in other places, and I see this has been written to be in compliance with a regulation, not so much to be a tool to actually implement and make things happen. So keeping it, easy for everyone to understand, very specific directions and funded oriented, and more of like abandon the word studies and call the work projects, because they're, they can happen. And I mean, that's how I tend to do it here now. Just try to make it very usable thing.
Doug, we opened up our POCD a year and a half ago to put in a whole new chapter on affordable housing. So we were able to do that. Theoretically, by law, we could do that. We could update this thing every other year if we wanted to, as conditions change.
Well, that's a
document that actually reflected on what our real plans are.
I think that is I think that's an important comment and catch for the POCD. You definitely, when you're talking about affordable housing, you definitely want to talk about access and mobility. That's when we did a gap analysis. That's one thing we missed. I mean, we talked to seniors, reentry, refugees, students, but we have to go back now and look at the locations of affordable housing in our service area and how well we address them or don't.
And I'm hoping that
Areas of persistent poverty in the region. Areas of persistent poverty are another criteria for the targeting of the funding. It's similar to equity, I suppose, but that's exactly what area of persistent poverty is, what the federal government is referring to certain census tracts. I don't think you have any, but there's a bunch in Bridgeport.
No,
Thank you, Paul.
we have resiliency issues for equity in Stratford that we need to address.
Chris, did you have something quick to add?
When it comes to kind of storing and keeping all these plans, I did want to point to something I think it's more maybe internal to our own committee. We have to look at is the website, is storing and organizing those plans. It's great to see a plan pop up from 2014 to think about, but any of the plans we make moving forward and some of the stuff we have now, even going on the website, there's two different versions of the Greenway Committee, one before it merged with Complete Streets, one after. In both of them, though, even our roster is not up to date, and I think a lot of the information may be there, but it's also just organizationally, I don't know who we have who's organizing that, but that'll be an important part of this, I think, to be able to share that and to make a digital form of the POCD available in a way that's accessible will be important too.
Thanks. Well, just to be mindful of everybody's time, I think we're going to wrap up. But like I said, we'll share a link to that 2014 plan with some concepts that I showed earlier. I will also share this list of questions. If please encourage you guys to take a look at it again. And if there's answers that you want to share with me or Susmita, that would be great. And again, thanks everybody for your time. I think this is a great meeting to have. And if you haven't gone on to the Plan Stratford website, like I mentioned, there's a great online survey. We'd love to get as many people to take that as possible. Continue to check that out because we're always adding new things to that as well. And so, Susmita, anything else to add?
Nothing. Thank you all for joining.
Okay.
This was very productive, and I think I have taken down a lot of notes to keep in mind when reviewing the transportation sections written by FHI. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Nice to meet everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank everybody who joined beyond the Greenway people. I appreciate it.
Goodbye, everybody.
See you. Take care.
Harold.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chief McNeil.
Yeah.
Ending the meeting for all.
Bye.